Chuck Liddell, known by his nickname, the Iceman, is one of the most iconic figures in mixed martial arts, MMA history. He helped bring the sport to mainstream popularity during the early 2000s and was one of the first true superstars of the UFC. Liddell's striking prowess, fearsome knockout power, and intimidating persona inside the Octagon made him a fan favorite, and his contributions to the sport helped shape the modern era of MMA. Early life and background. Charles David Liddell was born on December 17, 1969, in Santa Barbara, California. Raised by a single mother, Liddell grew up in a tough environment but always had a competitive spirit. From a young age, he was drawn to combat sports and began training in karate when he was 12 years old. His early martial arts foundation would later become one of the key components of his fighting style. Liddell's passion for sports extended beyond martial arts. He was also an accomplished football player and wrestler in high school, showcasing his versatility as an athlete. After high school, he attended California Polytechnic State University, Cal Poly, where he wrestled at the collegiate level and earned a bachelor's degree in business accounting. Liddell's background in wrestling and his early training in karate formed the basis of his well-rounded skill set, which would serve him well in his future MMA career. Liddell's journey into MMA began in the 1990s, when the sport was still in its infancy. He had trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under John Lewis and later added kickboxing and Muay Thai to his arsenal. These disciplines would become key elements of his approach to fighting, allowing him to develop into a dangerous striker with a solid grappling foundation. Early career in the UFC. Chuck Liddell made his professional MMA debut in 1998 at UFC 17, in an era when the sport was still trying to find its footing. The UFC at the time was not the global phenomenon it is today, but Liddell's early performances showed he had the potential to be a star. In his UFC debut, Liddell defeated No Hernandez by unanimous decision, showing flashes of the aggressive striking that would later define his career. In his early years, Liddell fought a mix of opponents in different organizations, building a reputation as a powerful striker with a strong chin. He fought in organizations such as Pride in Japan, and later became a regular competitor in the UFC, where he began to accumulate wins and establish himself as a legitimate contender in the light heavyweight division. Liddell's trademark fighting style began to take shape during these years. He was known for his wide stance, knockout power, and a striking style heavily influenced by his kickboxing background. Unlike many grapplers of the era, Liddell preferred to keep the fight standing, using his wrestling mainly for defensive purposes. His sprawl and brawl strategy allowed him to fend off takedowns and punish his opponents with devastating punches and kicks. The rivalry with Tito Ortiz. One of the defining aspects of Chuck Liddell's career was his long-standing rivalry with fellow light heavyweight Tito Ortiz. The Liddell-Ortiz feud was one of the first high-profile rivalries in UFC history and played a crucial role in elevating the sport's popularity. Liddell and Ortiz had once been training partners, but as both fighters rose through the ranks, tensions between them grew. Ortiz, the reigning UFC light heavyweight champion at the time, avoided fighting Liddell, leading to a public war of words between the two. Fans eagerly awaited a showdown between the two stars, and the UFC capitalized on the growing animosity by building up the fight as a must-see event. Their first encounter took place at UFC 47 in 2004. By this time, Liddell had already developed a reputation as one of the most dangerous fighters in the division, with his knockout victories over Alistair Overeem and Vitor Belfort further solidifying his status. The fight against Ortiz was highly anticipated, and Liddell did not disappoint. He knocked out Ortiz in the second round, officially launching himself into superstardom and establishing himself as one of the top fighters in the world. UFC light heavyweight champion, after defeating Ortiz, Liddell's momentum continued to build. In 2005, at UFC 52, he faced Randy Couture in a rematch for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. Couture had previously defeated Liddell at UFC 43 in 2003, but this time, Liddell was determined to make a statement. He knocked out Couture in the first round to win the UFC Light Heavyweight title, marking the pinnacle of his career. Liddell's reign as champion would become one of the most memorable periods in UFC history. During this time, he became the face of the UFC, appearing in commercials, television shows, and interviews. His mohawk haircut, signature ice-cold stare, and aggressive fighting style made him an instantly recognizable figure, not just among MMA fans, but also in mainstream sports media. Liddell successfully defended his light heavyweight title multiple times, knocking out some of the biggest names in the division, including Jeremy Horn, Randy Couture, in a trilogy bout, and Renato Babalu Sobral. His knockout power became legendary, and fans began to flock to his fights, eager to witness his brutal finishes. The rematch with Tito Ortiz in decline. In December 2006, Liddell faced Tito Ortiz in a highly anticipated rematch at UFC 66. By this point, their rivalry had reached new heights, and the UFC capitalized on the hype surrounding the fight. Liddell once again emerged victorious, knocking out Ortiz in the third round and cementing his dominance over his rival. However, after the second victory over Ortiz, Liddell's career began to decline. His aggressive, striking heavy style had served him well for years, but it also exposed him to significant damage. Liddell relied heavily on his chin to absorb punishment while landing powerful counters, but as he aged, his ability to take shots diminished. In 2007, Liddell lost his light heavyweight title to Quinton Rampage Jackson at UFC 71. Jackson knocked out Liddell in the first round, marking the beginning of a rough period for the former champion. Liddell would go on to lose 4 of his next 5 fights, including knockouts to Rashad Evans, Mauricio Shogun Rua, and Rich Franklin. The repeated knockouts and the visible wear and tear on Liddell's body led to calls for him to retire. UFC President Dana White, a close friend of Liddell, urged him to step away from the sport to preserve his health. Liddell finally announced his retirement in December 2010, bringing an end to one of the most storied careers in MMA history. Chuck Liddell's legacy in MMA cannot be overstated. He was one of the first fighters to bring mainstream attention to the UFC, and his contributions to the sport helped lay the foundation for its explosive growth in the 2000s. His rivalry with Tito Ortiz and his epic battles with fighters like Randy Couture and Quinton Jackson are remembered as some of the most important moments in the UFC's early years. Liddell's fighting style was a precursor to the modern-day emphasis on well-roundedness. He combined a strong wrestling base with elite-level striking, and his ability to keep fights standing allowed him to dictate the terms of the battle. His knockout power and fearsome reputation as a striker made him a fan favorite, and his personality outside the cage endeared him to millions of fans. After his retirement, Liddell remained involved in the UFC as an executive and ambassador for the sport. He has continued to make appearances at UFC events and has been a vocal advocate for fighter safety and better pay for athletes.